Good morning, my friends. As the world is trying to navigate the various challenges that this pandemic has created for all of us, the recurring word or concept that I find prevalent these days is the word trust. People are overwhelmed by anxiety. People don't trust anybody. They don't trust the government, they don't trust the media, they don't trust the World Health Organization. And there's this growing sense of anxiety and fear and distrust as people are contemplating the future, and there doesn't seem to be much hope there. I'd like to share a few thoughts around this concept of trust as I find it present and relevant to the relationship Jesus built with one of his disciples. The year is 155 AD. The place is called Smyrna. It's a city in a Roman province of Asia. There's this new wave of persecution that is sweeping against the Christian church, and the proconsul of Smyrna is especially vicious in his pursuit and persecution of the followers of Jesus. He focused on the pastor of the Christian church in Smyrna, a fellow by the name of Polycarp, who is close to 100 years old. When the members of his church, the Christians in Smyrna, found out that an arrest warrant had been issued in Polycarp's name, they whisked him away and they hid him in a barn on a farm outside of the city. But unfortunately, the police found him and they brought him back into the city in the center of this huge arena where there are hundreds of people screaming for his execution. As the old man stood in the middle of that arena, anticipating that he would soon die, the proconsul had a moment of sympathy for the old man. He raised up his arm to silence the crowds, and he shouted out, "Polycarp, curse the Christ and live." Polycarp, with a strong voice, answered back, 86 years have I served my master and king, and he has done me no wrong. I dare not blaspheme him now." And with that refusal to renounce his faith in Jesus, the proconsul brought down his arm and Polycarp was executed as a Christian martyr. I have often wondered, how did Polycarp do that? How did he remain so trusting? Where did he muster the faith and the courage to confront the proconsul and stick with Jesus? He remained faithful until his death. He remained faithful under the worst of circumstances. As I've studied a little bit about the early Christian church, I found out that Polycarp was actually mentored by John, the apostle whom Jesus loved. At least that's how he's introduced in the Gospels. Jesus and John had an amazing, extraordinary relationship, a trusting relationship. John and Jesus had an unusual bond that is very present in the account of the Gospels. John had to forsake prosperity in order to follow Christ. In fact, if you study Mark 1, you'll find that in verse 20, John has a brother, James. They're both the sons of Zebedee, and Zebedee is a creative, successful entrepreneur who owned a fishing business. Not only that he owned a fishing business, but he also had household servants helping with the household chores. He had a house up on the Galilee Lake, in the northern area. He also had a city residence in the city of Jerusalem. And in John 18 and 19, we also find out that John is very well connected. He has access to the court, and Caiaphas, the high priest, he's very well connected to the most prominent people in the society. And guess what? One day, he hears a call. This young rabbi, itinerant rabbi from Nazareth, calls him, "Come and follow me." And John walks away from the business, walks away from the homes, the houses that they owned, walks away from the wealth and the comfort of life. I forgot to mention that Zebedee and John, James, they owned all of these business and houses in a time where there's hardly a middle class. People were struggling in those days to make ends meet, and yet they were very successful. John walks away from success, walks away from comfort to follow Jesus. Such a powerful dedication, and I find it very interesting how he forgotten and forsaken everything. He left everything behind to commit his life to Christ and to the teaching and the preaching of the gospel. John also risked his life to follow Christ. He trusted Jesus so much that he is the only disciple present at the scene of the crucifixion. If you read about the crucifixion, Jesus is dying on the cross. There are a few women there, Jesus' friends, and of course the executioners are there. But there's only one of the 12 disciples, or 11 disciples, because one of them had committed suicide. Only one of the 11 is present at the cross. Of course, there could have been a fourth or a fifth or a sixth cross up on that hill, and the disciples knew. And so everyone is trying to hide and save their own skins. They don't want to die being crucified next to Jesus. But not John. John is present. John shows up and he's at the cross, supporting Jesus in the worst of circumstances. It is a comparatively easy thing to trust in someone when they are on top of the world, when they're performing miracles, when they're turning water into wine, when they walk on the surface of the sea. It's very easy to trust in someone when crowds of thousands of people are gathered there and they're cheering him on while he's feeding them with minimal resources. It's very easy to trust someone when you see them raising the dead, but it's not that easy. In fact, it's pretty tough to show up and trust somebody and support somebody when they are stark naked, hanging on a wooden beam between heaven and earth, crucified. It's very powerful, a powerful lesson in trust, as I see John forsaking prosperity, forsaking comfort, forsaking his wealth and his comfort zone, and risking his own life to follow Christ. He trusted Jesus enough to do that. He also trusted Jesus enough to actually remain anonymous. As John is writing the gospel, he tells stories that are poignant and powerful, and we learn so much from him. Now, we have three gospel writers. We call them the synoptics: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We call them the synoptics because they are synonymous. Their accounts are similar. In fact, 95% of the gospel of Mark is actually word for word, similar to the gospel of Matthew. So you find when you go to John, a different story. Not a different story, but a different touch, a different approach to the same story. If you open the Gospel of John, the title there is the Gospel according to St. John, or the Gospel according to John. Do you know that that is not part of the Gospel? That an editor inserted those words? In fact, you will never find John's name once in his own Gospel. His name is never mentioned. Now, we're very touchy about our names, aren't we? We want people to know who we are. We want people to recognize us. We need that recognition. Not John. John is willing to never have his name mentioned once in his own gospel. If Jesus' name is known and remembered for history, that was enough for John. Now, God did a beautiful thing. And for 2,000 years, ever since, mothers and fathers would name their sons after John. Beautiful. Jesus needed John to write a beautiful and a different, put a different spin, or add a different note to the same story. the gospel story, different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Powerful, beautiful, as you can see the similarities between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, some similarities with John, but John comes from a different angle, from a different point of view, and he presents the same story in a different light. Now, I don't think you've heard anything new so far. I'm pretty sure you've been asked many times that do you trust God? Do you trust Jesus? And very naturally, the answer would come on your lips, yes, of course. Jesus is trustworthy. I trust Jesus. But I'd like to ask you another question. I'd like to actually invite you to reflect on this question. Does Jesus trust you? Does Jesus trust you? Because you see, Jesus trusted John. Jesus trusted John with his gospel. As I mentioned the similarity between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John comes with a different approach, different perspective. He gives us information that Matthew, Mark, and Luke actually do not. It is because of John we know of the marriage feast of Cana. It is because of John that we know what was whispered around the table at the Lord's Supper on Thursday night. That's information that is not included in the other Gospels. And Jesus trusted John to tell that side of the story. In the closing line of John's Gospel, it says, if everything else that Jesus did were written down, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books. Talk about an editorial challenge here, right? Of all the things that Jesus did a lot of things. John had to narrow everything down to 21 chapters, his gospel. And Jesus trusted John that he would do the right job, that he would get it right. And John did get it right. In fact, it is because of John and that the fact that he got it right, that we know the golden text in the Bible. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Jesus trusted John with his gospel, powerful. Jesus also trusted John with his own earthly mother. There's this powerful scene, the crucifixion, and crucifixion was a terrible form of capital punishment. It was invented by the Phoenicians and it was perfected by the Romans. And I don't want to get into the gruesome details of how the executioners followed a common routine. I would like to mention just a couple of them. They would take the condemned person and they would find a soft spot at the base of the wrist that we all have it in between our bones. And they would actually take a spike and a sledge and drive that spike through that soft spot at the base of the wrist here. They would go down to the knees, to the feet, and they would basically do the same thing, drive that spike through the feet, and the executioners would then lift up the beam, the wooden beam, the cross, and they would drop it into a prepared socket in the ground. The problem is this: as the condemned person is hanging on this wooden beam, they're exposed. They're exposed to the elements. They're also losing a lot of blood. But most people did not die because of the elements or because of the loss of blood. Most people died from asphyxiation. They're hanging on this cross and hanging by their wrists, basically. And there's a paralysis that comes down on their arms and across their pectoral muscles. And they breathe in, but they cannot breathe out. And they would have to push up on their feet and straighten their legs to be able to breathe back out so that they can breathe in. So it was a very terribly painful moment, and therefore not a lot of uh, uh, condemned people who were crucified talked much. They could not, basically didn't have the breath to talk, to speak. They spoke seldom and little. That's why Jesus spoke only 7 times, 7 words on the cross. And one of those times is recorded in John 19. It says, near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, dear woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. It was expected that in that culture that the eldest son would actually take care of his widowed mother until she died. But Jesus couldn't. He was crucified that day. In a few days, he ascended back to heaven. But John was the one who took care of Mary. There is one guy whom Jesus trusted to take care of his mother. In fact, when you read the early church history, you find out that Peter went to Rome, when Thomas went to India, when they all went to Africa and across the Roman Empire, all the apostles, one apostle stayed put in Jerusalem until Mary died, so he could take care of Mary and fulfill the trust of Jesus. So here's the question. Do you trust Jesus? I know the answer. I know you answer a resounding yes, of course. Jesus is trustworthy. He's worthy of everything I have. But here's the question, the other question. Does Jesus trust you? Does Jesus trust you not to forsake your prosperity? Many of you that I know are not necessarily prosperous. Many of you that I'm connected with as a pastor and as your friend, you struggle to make ends meet. And especially during this time, everyone struggles because nobody is guaranteed tomorrow. Nobody is guaranteed the job. People are losing their income. They're losing their financial stability. So I'm asking, can Jesus trust you to put aside your comfort, to make your comfort zone, make the things that you own, the things that you have, to put them on a second place and put Jesus first, your faith in God? Can Jesus trust you to invest more in the kingdom of heaven than in the kingdom below? Can Jesus trust you with his gospel? Can Jesus trust you to tell the story? Not only the story that you study in the Gospels accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but to tell your story. The gospel, so to speak, of you and Jesus. The good news that Jesus has found you, that Jesus has cleansed you, that Jesus has forgotten your past and now is giving you a present, a new present and a future. Can Jesus trust you with that, with his gospel, with your testimony as to how he met you, he pursued you, and he forgiven you, and he's promised you an eternal future? Jesus needs people to demonstrate what it means to be a Christian during this pandemic. Jesus needs people with good looks and healthy bodies and athletic bodies, living a good, balanced lifestyle and a long life. And Jesus also needs people who are not as fortunate to have athletic bodies and healthy bodies. They may be struggling with disabilities and difficulties, health issues, chronic illnesses, and yet in spite of those challenges, they still stay faithful and committed to him. Jesus needs people to trust them with his story, to take his story to the easy places, to the most successful places, to all places. And I would like to really challenge you to ponder this and reflect on this question. Does Jesus really trust me? Because God does need people to bring light into the darkness, to bring light into this world, to be the salt of the world, to preserve the hope, to demonstrate what it's like to live with God, to live in His presence, to follow Jesus. The world needs hope, and the world cannot find hope in the news, in the government assurances, in the 401ks, in anything. The world can only find real hope in the person of Jesus Christ. So I'd like to invite you, my friend, to be the agent of hope. Be an extension of God on earth. Be the salt and light that Jesus needs you to be in this world. May God bless you.